espera, que me van a dar la... Me van a... Sí, calma, me van a dar la entrada ya. Ah, Muy buen día. Soy la doctora Mara Gómez y tengo
Good morning, I am
gusto
Dr. Mara
de dar
Gomez,
inicio
and it is my
a la mesa de
pleasure to
conclusiones de
start
esta
with the
novena
table of
conferencia
conclusions for this
iberoamericana
ninth
sobre
Ibero-American
justicia
Conference
electoral,
on Electoral
nuevas
Justice,
tendencias para
new
asegurar la
trends
equidad
to
en la
guarantee
contienda electoral en
equality
Iberoamérica.
in elections in
Cedo ahora la
Ibero-America. Now
palabra
I would
a
like to
Daniel
give the floor to
Sobato,
Daniel Sobato,
director regional para América
Regional
Latina
Director for
y
Latin
el
America
Caribe de
and
IDEA
Caribbean for
Internacional, quien
International
presidirá
IDEA,
esta
who
mesa
will
de
chair
conclusiones.
this conclusion
Adelante.
table. Thank you very much, Mara. You have seen how we have improved between yesterday and today. I'm talking about the coordination between Mara and myself. We are completely fine-tuned now. We have created a coalition government now. Now I am aligned, so let's begin. This is the stage in which we would like for us, jointly together with Magistrate Vargas Valdez, for all attendees, we would like all attendees to help us out in order to make some kind of summary, in order to get the highlights of this day and a half, where we got great speeches, great presentations, great dialogues, to see which are the main points in the context in which electoral justice has to operate today, and which are the main scopes and the main challenges, which are the more traditional challenges and also the new challenges when facing this new electoral super cycle, when, like we said, 14 of the 18 Latin American countries will hold presidential elections. And clearly, in many of these presidential elections, the electoral justice will have great opportunities, but also great challenges. So we wouldn't like for just us to summarize the conference, but we have agreed together with Magistrate Vargas Valdez to invite all attendees so that we can jointly do it, and we here in the main table, we can just summarize all your comments that will try to reflect upon all the points you have identified. So if Magistrate Vargas Valdez agrees, we will start with this first part, and then we would continue reading the agreements and the final resolution. If the methodology is clear and you are willing, I need some volunteers to start up. Yes, great. A woman. I like that. Miriam, please go ahead. Well, in order to be coherent with my presentation before, I would like for us to work in order to provide more accessibility to underrepresented groups in our society, which are people with disabilities with the different problems, the different disabilities that they might have, and also the fact of being women, that we, just by being women, we have many problems in many of our countries, so that will be a great challenge. We are all just getting started, but there is a lot more that we can do. And there's something else that I would also like to address, is what we discussed at the beginning, which is technology. Technology and social media, and the influence they have, especially the way we can regulate them, which will be very, very difficult, regarding the surveys, electoral advertising, which will be, like I said, a great challenge. But we can work maybe together with politicians, even though it might be difficult in some cases, like Dr. Patricio mentioned, because they are they would be a kind of a party and a judge, but we can work together with them to achieve this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miriam, for those great proposals. One of them, I think, is electoral justice. Has a lot of experience on that matter in the region, and there can be a lot of usefulness when it comes to horizontal cooperation, exchanging good practices, better practices. So, in order to address your first point, to include people with disabilities. But the other point that you mentioned is where I think the electoral bodies, not only in Latin America, but also in Spain and in other parts of the world, are really just getting started when it comes to facing the impact of new technologies. So we have been talking with Tarcisio on this topic, taking into account the progress Brazil has been making on that regard, to see if maybe next year we can host in Brazil an ad hoc conference on the regulation of the social media and the incorporation of new technologies. So there is a concrete offer from Brazil, also from Mexico, I think, is interested. Magistrate Vargas Valdez can help us with his standpoint. And Tarcisio, I would also like you to talk about this proposal, please. But what I would like to do is I would like to join the proposal of what to do with concrete proposals that of what we will do, when we will do it, starting next year, 2018, so we can provide a specific answer, concrete answer for these issues. Well, the idea is that next week I can talk to the chairman of the tribunal, so we can host this event that it would include Facebook, Google, Twitter, and these companies are also interested in participating. I know that. So, in order to avoid monetary fines that have been issued by the Supreme Tribunal for these companies. So they're also interested, and so we can work together for the elections of next year. And the idea is to really conceive that project as a vital project in order to move forward in this matter. Thank you very much. The important challenge that we will have next year is scheduling these activities, taking into account the intense electoral schedule. In Costa Rica, we will have in February and then a runoff in April, maybe in March in Paraguay, and there's April without possibilities of a runoff, right? Yes. Then in May, Colombia, and there is the high likelihood of a runoff. Then July 1st, we will have elections here in Mexico without a runoff possibilities. And then in October, we will have elections. I'm only talking about presidential elections in Brazil, with a high possibility of a runoff. So eventually, the Venezuelan elections should take place. We will see if they happen or not and under which conditions. But when scheduling these activities, it would be important to take into account also the electoral calendar of the year, the electoral schedule, in order to achieve the highest amount of turnout by all the electoral institutions. Thank you very much, Daniel. I would like to specify or to state that regarding this point on the use of social media, internet, and interfaces in democracy, I would like to say that the Mexican Electoral Tribunal since March has been working on a project that was presented in the Commission of Venice, to which we are a part of, that I think can work with this initiative. So this work that we have been developing for a few months, I think could be part of the contributions that we could make. I would call it some kind of a workshop, right? What we would have in Brazil. So we can have some work that we have done previously, as not to start from scratch. And what I would like to offer is that our tribunal could edit those collaborations, or that first approach that could be turned into a document or a book that can be edited and even translate to English, so it can be the starting point for this topic. Thank you very much, Mr. Magistrate. I have a proposal that I think can work here. Since you two signed a cooperation agreement recently, and it is current, between Mexico and Brazil, respectfully, I would like to suggest, why don't we create a working group led by Mexico and Brazil, together with the Commission of Venice. And Rafael told me that the Center for Institutional Research is also working on this topic, so if we have a three-prong approach. You don't have to get committed now, but you can see it with your people, with Spain, with the Center of Constitutional Studies, the Venice Commission, the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judiciary of Mexico, the Electoral Tribunal of Brazil. I think with that we will have a powerful group to address this topic, and of course the other institutions or tribunals that want to participate, they are welcome, but this would be the leaders that would start us up on that regard. Do you agree? Just one thing. Since the Venice Commission is not present, we would have to consult with them to see if they wish to participate under these terms. And otherwise, the working, what we have been doing, the working activities, is property of the tribunal, so we can provide it nevertheless. Yes, we also have a cooperation agreement with the Venice Commission, and I think we have to work as a network without doing the same things over again, by different parties. So Patricio, please go ahead with your comment. Thank you. Well, in my case, it's very interesting what you just mentioned, but the only thing that I can wish right now is just, I can only give you good wishes, because I want to say something that soon I won't be in these tribunals anymore, because I'm too young to stay here for too long. But in the years I have been involved in this, I have seen that in each one of the meetings that we have held here, we have addressed something that has to do with the independence of electoral tribunals from the executive and also from the legislature. And always in each one of these meetings we have said something about this, because since we have the judiciary, the legislature and the executive branch, the electoral powers in many countries are already independent. So I would like I said before, with the experience that I have gathered, I would like us to say something about this point. And that's that democracy will be better the more independent the electoral institutions are. And why am I saying this? Because yesterday Daniel said something very interesting. If the citizens don't trust the electoral institutions, they won't trust the authorities that are elected. So I think that must be strengthened in a way. Yeah, but I don't think we can say, oh, you need to do this, A, B, C, and D steps. No, but just the principle to try to reinforce the independence of both the electoral service and also the jurisdictional tribunals. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, and you can be sure that even when you retire, we will continue inviting you. So you will continue to be here if you wish. So, if you wish to do so. Oh, thank you very much. Who else? What else? I think it is very important what Mr. Daniel Sobato said yesterday regarding the spine of the funding for the democratic system. Yes, money and politics. It is very important. It has to be there. It is of paramount importance. Thank you very much, Madam Magistrate. Thank you very much. I would like to suggest the table to include in the conclusions the commitment of electoral justice and multiculturality with indigenous communities and peoples, because we need to reinforce the concept of protecting their rights, and also specifically with indigenous women and their political participation. Thank you. Okay, regarding money and politics, political funding and financing, I think it's one of the huge priorities in all of our countries. Yesterday, El País, the newspaper El País, said, okay, a bank of Andorra had $255 million paid to some politicians in Latin America by our friends of Leo de Brecht, and so reducing that corruption or eliminating that corruption would be, I think, pretty much impossible, because it wasn't just, one company it was just one company that started buying politicians, funding campaigns, but it's not the worst thing that we have. So we will continue to get these news. So what is the role of electoral justice when facing these problems? And I see two types of electoral justice. One, electoral justice that will play a very important role, but that does not have the capability, because it doesn't have the powers to annul elections in the case of financing abuse. That would be one category. And the other one, it would be the other electoral justice, like the one in Mexico, as per the new legislation, like the one from Brazil, that ended up in a divided vote 4-3, where you were able to annul the election of Dilma Rousseff. Tarcisio can tell us about this. And so some institutions have the capability of doing so, including presidential elections. So this is something that is relevant, and because that implies a lot of responsibility. So that is an aspect that I think is very important, because sooner or later I see a trend in Latin America that more and more countries will provide powers to the electoral justice, the power to annul. And I was talking with my colleague from Uruguay about that. And if that happens, the responsibility, it's a huge responsibility of the electoral justice when facing these circumstances. Tarcisio, I think it would be good if you could tell us a little bit about the case of Brazil, which is the most recent one. Welcome. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Supreme Tribunal of Spain. I would like to just make a comment regarding what you just mentioned. In the Spanish law, very recently, we have established the criminal responsibility of the juridical person. And one of the controversies has been whether political parties can commit offenses and, abiding by the legislations, could they be dissolved or removed from the registration or not. So we would have to consider that. This is just a comment to ponder whether it is an adequate thing to do or not. Okay, along those lines, talking about political financing. Panama is of concern. We are we have new standards for the expenditure caps and donation caps. So I would like to hear from countries such as Mexico that have more experience in this oversight controls. How are you so effective, or how can you know when they have have surpassed that cap. And the legislation, our legislation states that the election can be cancelled or annulled if this is proven to be true. So we have the power now to oversee political financing. Because it's a mix, so it's both public and private funding. So you were saying, I think this morning or yesterday, of all this online controls, that you don't have to have like all the physical files like we used to before. So we are very interested in knowing how effective your control is. Thank you. 2 comments on that regard. Why don't you talk to your colleagues of Panama to see if Panama is interested in being in hosting an event that deals with this topic? But here I think we have to acknowledge the dual nature of electoral institutions. Number one, in the case of Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, these electoral institutions, you have that dual function. You verify, and then you carry out the jurisdictional control. Other institutions, such as in Mexico, where the INE does one thing and then it is transferred to the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judiciary. I was talking with the people from Guatemala, which is similar to what you have in Panama. They just created 2 units. One to monitor the media, and 2 the verification. But you are pretty much a judge and a party at the same time. You have to research with your officials, and then you have to make decisions based on the decisions of your officials. So I think that dual nature of certain electoral bodies is something that we must analyze. And I think that today, between Mexico and Brazil, they both have the best practices in the region when it comes to incorporating technology. For instance, the supplier registry, online supplier registry, all the expenditures and income online, all the balance sheet online. So how can we use technology not only for this great white elephant that we always talk about, which is the e-vote, the electronic vote, but how can we incorporate technology in the different phases and stages of the electoral process in order to achieve a strategic aid, or to get strategic aid from technology?
Yo quisiera señalar en torno a esta
Thank you, Daniel, for what you said about Mexico regarding public financing. We have been working for about 3 decades to get 90% public and 10% private funding, and we have worked a lot with oversight controls. But today, based or as a result of the unfortunate earthquakes that took place a few weeks ago, the political parties started just renouncing public financing and saying that we should now change the model without explaining how and when. So I think that for us, just like we can provide experience from the past, experiences from the past, we can also receive good practices from other places and experience from other places that what it implies to do this change that I just mentioned. And many things have already been written in the wonderful book that the International IDEA has published on this regard. I think there are still some matters that have to be addressed in a pragmatic way, and we are of course open to receiving your advice in that matter. Yes, I'm sorry, Rafa, I'm mentioning you a lot, but I think that your participation yesterday was very good, because you talked about the new developments that are getting here regarding how to make the campaign, the microfinancing, crowdfunding, that will also challenge the electoral justice. So social media, funding, technology, they all change very quickly, and they will continue to change at a faster pace. So there's a great challenge regarding the capacity the capability that we will have to regulate an activity that we used to regulate it before because it was moving very slowly, but now it will be leaping forward and be very disruptive. So we have to be very aware of that. So if you think you can say something of relevance to see how we can include your Center for Constitutional Studies, please go ahead and do so.
Ahora que se está mencionando por parte del magistrado del tribunal.
Now that the magistrate of the tribunal is mentioning the responsibility of the companies in Spain, I think that we have to highlight an issue that we are facing, and I am referring precisely to the responsibility of the man behind, because as we were mentioning in the case of the treasurers or those that are the administrators of the resources of the political parties, they are the ones that are going to be responsible at the end of the day for these sanctions. So how does this work? This is kind of a window that are covering the conduct of the people that are really committing those offenses. So which are the actions that the political parties could take in order to really make responsible all those who are really responsible? For example, in the case of the Pemex Gate or the Amigos de Fox, which is the Friends of Fox, which were which were huge scandals in Mexico, and everything was solved with the fine that the political party paid. But the people that were behind all these matters didn't have any kind of responsibility. So justice is what we have to make here, because otherwise we are going to inhibit this kind of, with justice we are going to inhibit this kind of conducts. And we also have to make accountable the political parties, because up to now it has been resolved in a very comfortable manner with this invigilando culpability. So this is not a theoretical support which is correct in order to make them accountable for what they are doing.
Bien, sin entrar ahora en el debate de cuál hay infinito debate.
There is a huge discussion that could be a result of this, but if we omit the responsibility of the companies as a preventive method there is in the Spanish penal criminal code, what we call the compliance programs. And what are those? Well, they set out an internal organization in order to oversee which are the risks and the measures to take in order to prevent offenses within this sphere. That, I mean, no one thought that it was going to be carried out, but right now it is a reality, because the small, the medium, and big companies already have this compliance program. So, for example, in the City Hall in Madrid, they also have, this kind of scheme. So this has a positive effect, which is one of the reasons why in Spain, first of all, we really discussed about having this or not, because we had to make people accountable, and mainly because of some reasons, some specific reasons. But nowadays, as well as in the United States, we observe that the regulation of this responsibility is resulting in a positive way. And this would be, and this is only a reflection, a measure so that to prevent that the political parties incur in corruption or illegal acts. Along this line, Argentina has just approved the law for juridical responsibility, and following with the topic with Brazil, they all have also done. This is a very important guideline to fight corruption and not only to give these.
El segundo es lo que usted dice, los controles internos, lo que en inglés se llama el compliance.
So what we are saying here is that this is something that exploded in Latin America because the companies were not paying attention to the compliance. This had an exponential growth because precisely after they sent 19 years and 4 months to Odebrecht to the jail, many entrepreneurs started seeing and were aware that if you don't have the compliance internal mechanisms, even the OECD has very clear standards in this regard. So what we are discussing in some countries, like for example Chile and others regarding transparency, is the possibility of applying the same control levels that are applied to the political parties for transparency, but also for these to have inside their compliance internal mechanisms regarding funding in such a manner that the political party is not able to say, oh, I didn't know, I wasn't aware, and everybody can say, I didn't know, I'm in the campaign chief and everybody, and the responsibility is going to be on the financial manager, the CFO. So this is something that we are prioritizing, and thank you very much for mentioning this.
Solo un matiz sobre esto y luego digo, por eso ahora voy a eso, pero in Spain, when we have this debate of compliance for companies, we also said it in the extension of this. I mean, not only for the political parties, but also for the public administrations. And we opened an interesting debate that at the end of the day, it's impacting the funding of the campaigns. That's why yesterday, when you were mentioning about the funding and the public decisions that are going to be made, I think that compliance in the political parties is to assume that we are going to use it also in the public administration. And as far as I know, in Spain, we have lost that debate, but it's a good opportunity to start it in other places. And now, changing gears a little bit, is the technology and networks. I would say that we have been working on this, and we want to continue working on this. We have already defined an initial program where we have set out or highlighted 8 specific topics where we address the impact of technology in the electoral area. So this is kind of a draft. These are some first ideas that could be good, could be beneficial or good if you want to work with them. For example, UNAM has a master's degree in electoral law. In Spain, we have people working with this. So I think that we can work together in this field because it's not only underworked at the state level, but the academia is not working it enough also. So I think that if we work between the electoral tribunals and organizations, I think that we can say that we can issue a guide of good practices that could be applicable also for the parties. I mean, to state which are the things, because I insist, the regulation, because of the fear that we have to make decisions, it's difficult. Now, regarding the funding and the crowdfunding, I think that this is something, quote unquote, that we can work with the new IT, because what we want to do here is to say that we are amending the system as a whole by prohibiting anonymous funding, because in the system they are legislating the private funding, but maybe this is going to be a determining element, because we observed this in 2008 that the microfinance was above the percentage that they were expecting to have. So at the end of the day, I think that the this impacted the last collection. So there is where there is a field that is going to impact directly, not only to the small usage of the technology, but for the funding model of the debate that you are trying to set out in Mexico. So I think we are preparing a kind of model like this. We did a workshop some months ago, and I think that there is kind of a rotation to change in order to increase the controls. But I think that this is going to also done with equity. So it's interesting to align all these issues. Thank you very much for mentioning these debates, because one sector and in one group of Latin American countries, the formula to eliminate corruption is all public funding, which is absurd because this is not going to solve anything. On the other side, to open the possibility for the companies to make some contributions, like Argentina was saying. Brazil forbid this through the jurisprudence. Uruguay also forbid it. Chile first accepted it, and then they forbid it. So this public and private debate, it's being rethought once again. So I think it's very important to talk about it. José Luis was next, I think, and Dominicana also asked me for the floor. Thank you. I think that regarding funding, 1/4 of the whole electoral laws in Mexico, which is pretty abundant, is devoted to the taxation or fiscalization of the parties, political parties. And I insist, we have had a great progress along this line, but one of the specificities that we have here, because Dr. López Guerra was also mentioning about this in his book, what has to do with the power of not being able to oppose to these tax matters authorities and to work together with the financial intelligence authorities, because this is what really allows us to have both areas of taxation, when we precisely are seeing that the public and the private monies are more and more mixed. So what we will be interested as a country, Mexico, is that what we can also analyze, and I was mentioning this yesterday, that as of 2014, the Mexican Constituent stated that the nullity the reason was if they go above 5% of the cap of the expenditures for the campaign. So this is a new incentive in order to win. If they don't win through the ballot boxes, they are going to win through the accreditation of the accounts of the opposing party. So I think that this has some complexity edges, and as you were mentioning the criminal responsibility, I think that this is another type of responsibility that we should have to analyze in order to see who is really being punished with a solution like this. Are we punishing the political parties? Are we punishing the citizens because they have to go once again to vote, or they have to suffer another electoral campaign of I don't know how many days, and the public cost that this implies for the staff, for the state, sorry. Roman, thank you very much. Precisely, Magistrate Vargas has started talking about what I want to address as criminal responsibility. Precisely this thing about compliance, which brings the debate of the criminal responsibility of electoral offenses. For example, in my country, some understand, because of a legislative void, that the Electoral Tribunal is the criminal investigation. can we be a judge in one of the parties? And to see what we are investigating in a criminal matter or criminal wise. Nevertheless, I think that we can value the thing of which are the tools that we are going to use and which is the main duty of this electoral tribunal or these bodies. Because at the end of the day, these things about lack of regulation, compliance, are part of the criminal law. So, and sometimes the state doesn't know what to do, and then not only have the decision to make about the electoral contentions, but also about the criminal contentious issues. Thank you very much. My name is Manuel Delgado Iribayen, for those that have just arrived. What Mr. Vargas was mentioning gives the cue for my comment. We have to distinguish the possible dissolution of the political party because of the responsibility that they have of the annulation of an election or the annulment of the elections. These are two different topics. In the case of a political party, in Spain, it only can be done by a special chamber of the Supreme Court because they have to participate magistrates of different chambers, and it can be only done with the political reforms which are linked to terrorism. That's the only action that we have been able to state. Different from the annulment of an election, I think that this is a very delicate matter, mainly in the case of the presidential regimes, when there is a president being to annul. The election of a president is a very severe measure, and that has to do with elements that are very powerful, which make me think that maybe this decision was adopted by a judiciary body which is standing alone and independent completely, and I coincide with what Chair Valdez was mentioning, that electoral tribunal has to be conformed by judiciary people or with mechanisms that are different from those that are part of the nomination. So the risk of the electoral tribunal, for example, which was appointed by something that was more democratic by the parliament nor the Congress, but the Congress, we have these representatives that could be, for example, we can discuss of these things, and then we are going to say that we need to have different elections. So, as a possible conclusion, and according to what Mr. Valdez was mentioning, the idea of saying that electoral justice, regardless of their model, has to preserve all this transparency of the electoral processes and to assure the impartiality of their members. So this goal is easier to meet if the bodies of the electoral justice are, most of them, or them among their members, judiciary members, or if they do not depend on the political education that are coming from the electoral processes. Always abiding by the good practices. The experience is saying that this kind of procedures could be much more efficient. I will make a comment afterwards to you about this. Julio, please.
Sí, bueno, siguiendo con la línea temática que ustedes habían planteado.
Along these lines and this same topic, maybe a fundamental issue to mention in this conclusion document would be precisely what Magistrate Patricio was mentioning regarding the defense of the electoral authority with the autonomy in several countries. For example, Nicaragua, in Central America, we are acknowledging this as a body of the state, I mean the judiciary power. I think that this is important, specifically in the case of San Salvador, that after the signature of the agreements of peace, we set out an electoral body which was mixed. It was conformed by magistrates of the Supreme Court of Justice, as well as from the proposals of the political parties who had obtained the greatest amount of votes in the presidential election. And in the case of our country,
están sosteniendo
any discussion that is held results irrelevant when there is a different authority which is above the maximum authority, which is the judiciary body, saying that by defending the fundamental rights can accept any request and any demand from any citizen, saying that they have been breached their rights. I mean, the Electoral Tribunal is the maximum, the highest authority only for electoral matters. And for others, then we have different entities that could be, for example, the Supreme Court of Justice through one of the chambers. So I think that we are speaking in different languages. So it would be correct, I think, to defend the electoral authority, which is specialized in electoral matters. Otherwise, an external body is going to issue 11 resolutions after the elections, and then they change the scheme from open lists to closed lists, and after the election of the representatives have already been carried out. So I think that we are speaking maybe different languages regarding our reality in El Salvador. In the case of funding of the political parties, I understand that the backbone of the electoral democracies, because the democracy as a comprehensive concept is bigger than the democracy and I mean election-wise. Nevertheless, regarding the respecting the equality principle, it is important to regulate funding. Otherwise, we can have an imbalance. And I think that yesterday you have been discussing about this. In my country, the issue goes beyond these limits, and we have learned a lot from Mexico and other countries regarding the regulation of funding that we are just starting to perform since 2013. So I would like to mention that the problem that we are facing here is in regard to private funding. There is a public funding and there is kind of a mixed system that I think that could be the solution to this debate between public and private funding, to look for a balance. But in my country there is a huge problem because regardless of the scheme, I mean public or private, these are companies that can go with one or other party, and they may carry out some donations, masking them. For example, if we have a political party from the right or the left or whatever, you can have them 3 hours in television or radio without paying any kind of fee. And maybe you may think that this is a subversive idea, that if you have to regulate the advertising time and that the electoral tribunal can regulate it. And this has been a huge issue for all the representatives. Nevertheless, the Mexican experience and the Spanish experience can also help us in order to develop a little bit more equality in electoral-wise, because it's not only to see or to know who is funding, but to provide the electoral tribunal to divide or to give a balance to the advertising campaigns. And this has been also done for the political parties. In some ways, there is a huge revolution in our country of independent candidates, that they are not specifically part of any party, and they may receive illicit money from here, and they have been even linked to
drug dealing. At least in my country, in several countries of Latin America, this has happened. How can we do to regulate this? Thank you very much, Julio. This thing of independent candidates is something that is growing with huge strength. 40 independent candidates pre-registered in Mexico. 40. They didn't, of course, got the 800 and something signatures, but we have 40 that were willing to register. 28 in Colombia, 16 in El Salvador. 8 in Asunción, okay, 28 in Asunción. So we are going to experience a fragmentation and a competition between independent candidates and parties, with all the problems that we are going to have in governability, funding problems, etc., etc. Jose Ignacio, please. I had a few things to add, and yesterday I mentioned some of this when I talk about the project that you have here in the Senate. Some of the things that we were mentioning by Korea and El Salvador are already included for the regulation of advertising in the media and the masked or covered funding, and this was through a commission who determined that the advertisements were going to be or have different prices according to who was advertising or what the party was advertising. So fortunately, the sanction of the House of Representatives is already there. In the second place, also because of some comments made by some of my peers, I would like to tell you that the Electoral Court, and this is from the year 52, they also had this power previously, but with a different mechanism. And this is the only body that can annul totally or partially the elections, but with a special majority. With 6 of the members out of the 9 members, I mean 2/3 of the members, within which we must have had 3 that were elected by 2/3 of the Electoral Assembly, because we have a different procedure, but for a simple majority, and we call them the party members. In this way, we assure that the election, the total or partial annulment of this election, is offers some guarantees of reliability under the circumstances that were posed for this annulment. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias de nuevo.
Thank you again. I would have liked to be a man who would have proposed this, but I cannot wait any longer. I will do so. I think that gender-based political violence against women is an important point, even though some people think it's not that relevant, but I can say that those of us who have lived it personally, before becoming magistrate, I was mayor of a city by a popular election, and I can say that it is difficult to be successful in this arena, and we are victims in this process in order to reach public office. Thank you. I completely agree, and I think that must be one of the foundations of the discussions for the following activities and meetings. But something else that I think we need to continue to work on cross-sectionally is people not or disliking democracy now. Yesterday, Mr. Sobato already talked to us about the figures, but I think that something that's not clear is what are the causes and what is the cure. And since there's no other better system that we know to renew the public powers of all the countries that are present here, I think is something that we must continue to work on and to look after it.
Gracias. En cuanto a las candidaturas independientes.
Thank you. Regarding independent candidacies, I think something else that is important is the following. Those independent candidates that have been that belonged to an established political party and then and have the same mindset and now are independent. Okay, I think we could continue, but we have a very good information now. My colleagues Lourdes and Alberto are trying to organize this information together with the last three conferences, the information from the last three conferences, Cancun 2014, Cusco 2015, and Brazil, Manaus 2016. So we will summarize them all. So we will take a 10-minute break, and we will come back in 10 minutes to share with you the final summary of the declaration. Thank you. Yes, we conclude with this conclusion table, and now we will go to the resolutions, signing the declaration, and the closing ceremony of this 9th Ibero-American Conference, which will take place after a 10-minute break. Thank you.